Greetings, my custards. We're sort of cooking light tonight. I had this one for Nutcracker Hazelnut Stout from Mad Squirrel, whoever they are. Not bad. Well, actually, I shouldn't really be drinking because we're going Weight Watchers. What we're going to cook tonight is a Weight Watchers meal. Okay, and for those of you who do your points, this is a 4-point meal per serving. So I'm making 2 servings. I've reduced down the quantities because I think originally it was for 4 people, but it's 4 points per person. So if I just, oh, it's right there in front of me, dozy bastard. Now the thing is with Weight Watchers, it's all got to be measured if you want to make it accurate for the point. And although they quite often use a cooking spray to reduce the amount of oil, in this case we're going to use, because that's what it tells you to do, 2 teaspoons of sesame oil. Now my experience of using the amount of oil that they give you in these Weight Watchers things is never enough, but that's what we're doing. So I've already prepared everything. I've got here now, these are the quantities for 2 people. 110 grams of brown rice, in this case it's brown basmati rice that's been cooked. Okay, it's still a little bit warm. Then I've got some quite finely diced carrot. I've got 100 grams of that. I think it's slightly over that, but not a lot. Okay. Peas. Now these are frozen peas, but the recipe says cook them, boil them. So, oops, excuse me, they've been done. 80 grams of peas. I've got 2 eggs. You're going to want some salt, some pepper. I've got about 3, it said use 2 medium spring onions, but these are quite small. So I've got 3 to 4 finely sliced spring onions, and that's going in at the end. And then it says about 120 grams of cooked tiger prawns. I've got nearer 200 because 1 pack didn't look like an awful lot. And then that's it. So let's get this oil heating up. While we're waiting for this to warm up, and the first thing we can do is heat our rice. Weight Watchers. Now you probably know exactly what Weight Watchers is, but Weight Watchers started well, quite a while ago. Okay, about 1963, and it came about through one woman called Jean Nidetch, and she'd spent most of her, she was a housewife and a mother, but most of her life she'd been overweight, and she'd tried everything. She'd tried like these, you know, diets, fad diets, hypnosis, all these different things, and none of them ever worked, or if they worked, she just couldn't keep the weight off. And incidentally, that is something that nowadays people like Weight Watchers and that will tell you. Dieting is useless because people get in their mindset, you diet, you lose your weight. I've lost my weight, I can forget dieting, and what happens? All comes back on again. So you have to actually change your lifestyle. Okay, and that's partly what today's Weight Watcher program is all about. So anyway, I've just tipped that cooked rice that I previously drained, obviously, into there, and we're just going to, I'm going to turn that heat down a little bit, and we're just going to cook that through to get that rice back up warm. So anyway, she tried everything, and she was really disheartened. In 1961, she was 214 pounds. She comes from Queens in New York, so you know they always talk about everything in pounds, not kilos. Although to be honest, I work in pounds, stones and pounds anyway. Now I'll probably turn that too low. And a sort of friend or an acquaintance asked her when she was expecting. And that was sort of a turning point for her, that she was horrified that she was that big that someone thought she was pregnant. So she managed to sign up for this, I think it was called the Prawn diet. And it was this guy from the 1950s who devised this particular type of diet. And this sort of, it was a free plan, 10-week weight loss. But what she didn't like was that although it was all free and you turned up for these meetings, weekly meetings and everything, what she didn't like was that they discouraged any like chat. They didn't want to know, you know, just get on with the diet, just do that. And it worked for her. She did lose the weight, but she just weren't happy with the way they run it, particularly this fact where they discourage people talking together. So she felt that's what she needed. So I'm still just cooking this through in a minute. And what I'm going to do at this stage, because this carrot's quite cold, the peas are still slightly warm and everything, so I'm just going to chuck the carrot in at this point, and we're going to toss that through with that rice and start getting a bit of heat into the carrots. So anyway, she decided to set up like a little support group at home, and she invited sort of other fellow sort of weight loss friends along, and they used it as an opportunity to sit and chat and talk about, you know, the problems there. Because one of her big problems apparently was, although this diet plan worked for her and she lost about 20 pounds in that week or such, that 10-week thing, she just couldn't stop binging on a certain type of cookie, and it was like needing that encouragement to say to her, don't do it. Which of course at the plan, this free sort of health clinic plan, they didn't want to talk about things like that. So she set up this support group, and lo and behold, she found like-minded people, and they like, I say enjoyed, they used this as an opportunity to talk about their problems, how they were struggling to lose the weight, everything else like that, and it was a great success. So she expanded it. She eventually got this group up from 6 people to like 40 people within 2 months. And it was obvious there was a lot of people out there wanting this support. So she started spreading the word in other neighbourhoods. So before we get into any more of that, now I'm just going to let that heat through a bit, just keep turning it over, and then we're going to be adding in our peas and our prawns. Like I said, this is a very, very simple, very few ingredients prawn fried rice, courtesy of Weight Watchers, who at this point in time in my story don't exist as such. So at this point I'm going to put in my peas. Now, one of the things that her little support groups did, and I'm going to put in the prawns, and we're now just going to carry on mixing this all through and just getting that all nice and hot, as it were. Remember, the rice has been cooked, the peas have been cooked, the prawns are cooked prawns. I dare say if you wanted to use raw prawns you could do, but obviously cook them first. But But one of the things she did at her group, which they didn't do at this, like the prudent diet plan, was weekly weigh-ins. So they could all sort of check their progress out. And although she had initially lost these 20 odd pounds, what happened, it was once they sort of got into this group doing their weigh-ins, their discussions and everything else like that, and also she thought about, why don't we have prizes for people who've managed to lose weight and things like that, and acting as a little incentive. I don't quite know what her prizes were, presumably not a whole big pack of cookies that she liked, but anyway, as a result of this, by October 1962, she'd hit a target of getting down to 142 pounds. And she, thereafter, with everything she continued to do, and developing weight wonders, she maintains that she never ever went above 150. So her idea worked, and she'd gradually spread it, and there was various support groups all over the sort of neighbourhoods. And one was a couple, Al and Felice or Felice or whatever, Lippett. And they were a couple in one of the groups she had, and they both wanted to lose weight, and they did. And Al was a businessman. He was a garment seller, apparently. And he saw potential here, and he said to her, why don't you turn this into a business? Because, okay, the diet's the diet, but what you've done is what's turned it around for most of these people and given them the encouragement and everything else that they need. Now, that aside, we're just going to continue just to cook this through. Okay, we want to get everything nice and hot. The prawns have been in the fridge, but they have been out a little while, obviously, because otherwise sling them in, it's going to take even longer. So, Al said to her, let's make it a business. And he became like the CEO, and she became like, well, no, second in charge, I suppose, but also the main like consultant and person doing the marketing, as it were, going out there talking to the people. And that was 1963. By 1964, Al decided, let's franchise it. And that's what they did. By 1967, they had 102 franchises, not just in the US, which obviously where it had been up to this point, but also Canada, Puerto Rico, Great Britain and Israel. So it was obviously becoming a success, and it was something people wanted. They continued to expand, but it wasn't all just about Al. His wife, Felice or whatever her name was, she became like the food guru. She did all the research on nutrition, food, and everything like that. And actually, from her, they produced their first cookbook in 1966. And it sort of sold out. They sold over 1.5 million copies. Such was the sort of need for people for like healthy eating, dieting foods. And by 1968 in January, they'd actually got more than 1 million people sort of signed up to this, across the world, that is, obviously. So this is getting there. Now, this is where I always feel things go a little bit iffy with Weight Watchers, because this is now quite dry. And what we're going to be doing in a minute is add in some egg, and we're going to want to sort of scramble it, if you like, and mix that in. And at the moment there's very little oil or anything like that in there to do that, but never mind. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to give that another minute or so, and then I'm going to push this all to one side so we've got room to crack 2 eggs in there. Right, given what this was like, what I've done is I've cracked the 2 eggs in there and I've just lightly beaten it, and I'm just going to chuck that in there. And then once it to start scrambling, see now this is sort of in a way a non-stick pan, but the lack of any real oil left in there is sticking a little bit. So I'm just going to basically get it so most of the liquid is gone, and then I'm going to stir it through and we'll cook it all in together. So anyway, so like I said, they'd franchised it, they'd got all these cookbooks and everything like that. They're starting developing like kids camps for, you know, for kids to lose weight. They did things like, oh, let's get a set of scales that are branded Weight Watchers, because that's what they were calling it by then. So right, so you can see now they're sort of like runny scrambled eggs. So let's now start mixing that all in together. Okay, and I'm just going to turn that heat down a little bit. Just keep trying to keep it off the bottom there. Weirdly, when I looked at the picture of this on the Weight Watchers site, it almost looked like it had chopped tomatoes in it, but I think it might have just been sort of the lighting, if you like. And so some of the carrot looks more like tomato because it's doing a little bit like that now. I mean, anyway, they'd done all this and it was a really roaring success. And so they eventually sold the business to Heinz. Well, Heinz were interested and they bought it. Jean carried on in her sort of capacity as like the chief ambassador for it all and everything. And it carried on going from success to success. The prime thing was, it was a subscription model. People paid, you know, to belong, if you like. And that was their prime income source. However, this is my last beer for this week. So they were sold out to Heinz in 1978. But by then, other people have started getting on the act, and you had like Slim Fast and Nutri, whatever. There was more and more companies flogging these sort of diet plans, diet foods, and things like that. And so Weight Watchers were starting to struggle. Now, I'm now just going to add a little bit of ground black pepper, and we're also going to give it a little seasoning with some salt. So I'm just going to mix all that in, and then we're almost ready to serve it up. So they started going to decline, and although they'd developed all these apps into the year 2000, things like that, by 2025, sort of first quarter of 2025, they were in dire straits. Things like weight loss jabs, Ozempic and that, were basically affecting their sort of membership. People were turning to what they saw as quick fixes and were no longer interested in sort of diet plans, if you like. And so they filed for bankruptcy. they were determined not to go under, and they set themselves a goal that within 40 days they'd get rid of their debts, they'd turn things round, and they did. So in July 2025, they got relisted on the NASDAQ, or whatever you call it, and they managed to pull themselves out of bankruptcy. And once again, there they are, still with their subscription model, selling cookbooks, selling other branded goods to go with it. I mean, before then they was already doing their ready meals, their frozen meals, things like that, that were all branded. Oh, initially I should say, the whole way the diet program worked was based very much like the Prudent Diet one was. Right, that's done now, so I'm just going to turn that heat off. Where you weighed everything, you weighed the amount of foods and everything. It was all calorie counted and things like that. And one of the things that Gene had come up with was, well, let's make it simpler. So they developed the Weight Watchers point system. And although that has been revised several times today, it's still, you think about your points. Some things are 0 points, some things are lots of points. And it's all this algorithm works out the calories and carbs and things like that, protein, to come up with a point system, which is a lot easier. They also introduced these sort of like flexi point systems, so you could carry over some points from the week before. But the whole point of the diet program was you didn't skip meals, you didn't do this, that and the other, so you can only carry over so much, because the idea is if you do what you should do every week, then you will lose weight. They rebranded themselves slightly in the past as well, simply to say we're not just a diet company, weight loss company, we're a weight management and a healthy sort of wellness company. So there you go, there's Weight Watchers. So right, I'm just gonna, so remember this is 2 portions, so I'm splitting this into 2. So the final thing I'm going to do is take some of them chopped spring onions and we'll just sprinkle them on top. And now let's have a little taste of our Weight Watchers prawn fried rice. The rice gives you a little bit of nuttiness, and you definitely get crunch from the carrots. Actually, given you haven't got things like soy sauce in it, garlic, it's actually quite flavoursome. Hi, there you are. Your Weight Watchers prawn fried rice.